The morning I walked into that courtroom, my son Michael rolled his eyes at his wife as if I were just some bothersome old man. But when the judge saw me, time stood still. "Mr. Harrison," he whispered with wide eyes, "it's really you." The entire courtroom fell into absolute silence while my son and his arrogant spouse exchanged panicked glances. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. My name is Harrison, I'm 72 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was just an ordinary grandfather. Every morning I woke up at 5:30 a.m., prepared my coffee in an antique mug my late wife Eleanor had given me on our 30th anniversary, and watered my rose garden while watching the sun rise through the kitchen window. It was a simple and predictable life, but filled with small joys that kept me connected to memories of the past. For nearly 50 years, I was the father who sacrificed everything for my only son, Michael. I worked as a janitor during the day, handyman at night, and on weekends sold homemade crafts at the local farmer's market. Also, Michael could attend good schools and have the life I never had. When he married Patricia, a woman with cold eyes and a smile that never reached her pupils, I swallowed my discomfort and welcomed them for Sunday lunch with my finest dishes and a smile that concealed my concerns. After my wife's death, I expected Michael and I would grow closer. How wrong I was. Instead of finding comfort in each other, he began viewing me as a burden. His visits became mechanical, his calls less frequent. The way he looked at the house where I raised him, the house where he took his first steps, where we celebrated all his achievements, changed completely. It was no longer a home of memories, but an asset to be acquired. The greatest disappointment of my life happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. I had prepared beef stew with potatoes, the recipe Michael loved in childhood. I set the embroidered tablecloth I made when he entered college and even bought fresh flowers for the occasion. When they arrived, Patricia entered without knocking, as if she already owned the house. She threw herself onto the armchair that had belonged to my Eleanor and turned on the television without even greeting me. Michael carried a folder of documents and that distant look he'd developed in recent years. A look that belonged to a stranger, not the boy who once held my hand with such trust. "Dad, we need to talk," he said with a cold voice that chilled me to the bone. He sat on the edge of the sofa as if he didn't want to stay there long. "Patricia and I have decided this house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore." I felt my heart constrict as he continued. "We found a great senior living facility for people your age. You'll have company, activities, medical assistance." "But, Michael, this is our home," I replied, my voice failing. "Everything we built is here, all our memories." Patricia interrupted without taking her eyes off the television. "Memories are in your head, Mr. Harrison, not in the walls. You'll like the facility. It's modern, has a garden." What she didn't say, but her calculating eyes revealed, was that they wanted my house. The house Eleanor and I built with so much sacrifice over decades. The house where we kept not only memories, but also a part of our souls. Michael placed the folder on the table. "We've already handled all the paperwork. You just need to sign." His voice was mechanical, as if he were talking about any contract, not about uprooting his own father from the only place I had left in the world. When I refused to sign, the atmosphere changed quickly. Patricia turned off the TV and confronted me with a coldness she'd never shown so openly. "Mr. Harrison," she said, adjusting the expensive tie she wore, "you need to be reasonable. You can't keep living alone. Last week you forgot the stove on. It's dangerous." That was a blatant lie. I had never forgotten the stove on in my entire life, but I realized at that moment they were willing to invent anything to get what they wanted. In the days that followed, they intensified the pressure. They brought real estate agents without warning me, strangers who measured my rooms and talked about renovation potential, as if I weren't present. Michael began packing my things without permission, deciding on his own what I needed to take and what could be discarded or sold. "This sweater is so old, Dad," he said, holding the blue sweater I wore to my wife's funeral. "You won't need it at the facility." Every object he discarded was like having a piece of my history torn away. Old photographs, love letters Eleanor had written to me, books we read together on winter nights. All of this was just clutter taking up space in the house they already considered theirs. The last straw was when Michael found my jewelry box. It was a small carved wooden box Eleanor had given me on our first wedding anniversary. Inside, besides some pieces of sentimental value, was the gold watch that had belonged to my father. "I'm going to keep this safe," he said, putting the box in his bag. "These things can disappear at the facility." At that moment, I saw something in my son's eyes that I'd never noticed before. Greed. Pure and simple greed disguised as filial concern. And for the first time in my life, I felt a rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. That night, alone in my room, while I listened to Michael and Patricia talking in low voices in the living room about how to solve the problem I had become, I cried like I hadn't cried since my wife's death. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of indignation, of revolt against the injustice of being treated like a disposable object after a lifetime of dedication. It was then that I made a decision. I wouldn't leave without fighting. I wouldn't allow them to erase my existence, to reduce me to an inconvenience to be solved. With that newly discovered determination, I dried my tears and began thinking about how I could defend myself from those who should protect me. What I didn't know was that soon I would discover a secret that would completely change the balance of power in that house. A secret my dear Eleanor had kept to protect me precisely from a moment like this. The next morning, Michael arrived early with more boxes and renewed determination. "Today we're going to organize Mom's office," he announced, heading to the room I'd kept intact since Eleanor left us 3 years ago. "No," I replied with a firmness that surprised him. "That place isn't ready to be touched yet." "Dad, it's been 3 years," he replied impatiently. "We can't maintain a shrine forever. The house needs to be prepared for sale." I realized at that moment that no matter what I said, they had already decided my future. The house would be sold with or without my consent. They would find a way to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate. When Michael went out to get more boxes from the car, I entered the office and locked the door. That was the last refuge of my wife's memories, the place where her scent still floated in the air, where her things remained exactly as she had left them. I ran my fingers over the books on the shelf, over papers organized meticulously in folders, over the picture frame with our wedding photo. It was then I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. On the last shelf of the bookcase, hidden behind a row of old encyclopedias, was a small safe built into the wall. In 47 years of marriage, I never knew of its existence. My hands trembled as I tried to imagine the combination. I tried our wedding date, Eleanor's birthday, Michael's birth. Nothing worked. Finally, on impulse, I tried the date we met, that rainy Sunday afternoon when we took shelter under the same bakery awning. To my surprise, the safe opened. Inside was a leather folder with Eleanor's initials engraved in gold. Opening it, I found documents that left me breathless. Property deeds, bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, stock certificates in renowned companies, insurance policies with values that made my head spin. And in the middle of it all, a sealed envelope with my name written in my wife's unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. "My dear Harrison, if you're reading this letter, it means I've already departed, and you've found what I kept to protect your future. Forgive me for keeping our true financial resources secret all these years. It wasn't for lack of trust, but for precaution. I always distrusted Patricia's intentions. There's something about her that worried me from the beginning, an excessive ambition that made me fear what might happen when I was no longer here to protect you. That's why I set up this safety net silently, investing every extra penny we managed to save. Everything documented in this folder belongs exclusively to you. Michael will only have rights to a small part, yes, and only if he takes care of you with the same love and dedication you always had for him. Otherwise, you have all the power to protect yourself. Use this power wisely, my love, not for revenge, but to guarantee the respect you deserve. Deep down, Michael is a good person, just easily influenced. But if you need to defend yourself, now you have the means to do so. With all my love for all eternity, Eleanor. Tears ran down my face as I absorbed every word. My Eleanor, always so quiet and discreet, had built an empire in silence to protect me. While I believed we lived modestly, she invested in properties, stocks, and businesses that were now worth a fortune. Among the documents I found something that left me speechless. The deed to the building where Michael and Patricia lived. The luxury apartment they were so proud of, which they flaunted as a symbol of their success, actually belonged to me. They paid rent to a management company that deposited the amount directly into an account in my name, an account I didn't even know existed. There was more. Eleanor owned shares in the company where Patricia worked. They weren't minor shares, but a significant participation, enough to influence important decisions, even about the future of employees, like my daughter-in-law. Sitting on the office floor surrounded by papers representing more money than I ever imagined owning, I laughed through tears. Michael and Patricia believed they were kicking me out of my house to keep it for themselves, having no idea this house was the smallest of my properties. The insistent knocking on the door brought me back to reality. "Dad, open this door right now," Michael shouted. Quickly, I put the most important documents in my bag and returned the rest to the safe, closing it carefully. When I opened the door, Michael looked at me with irritation. "What were you doing locked in there?" "Just saying goodbye," I replied, with a calm that disconcerted him. "You're right, Michael, maybe it's time to move forward." He studied me with suspicion, but then his face softened, believing I had finally given in. "I'm glad you understand, Dad. You'll see it's best for everyone." "Yes," I agreed, holding my bag firmly where I kept the documents that would change everything. "I'm sure everyone will get exactly what they deserve." That night, while Michael and Patricia celebrated their apparent victory with an expensive bottle of wine in the living room, I made a call to a number I found among Eleanor's contacts. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, attorney. "Dr. Mitchell, my name is Harrison Thompson, widower of Eleanor Thompson. I need your help with some urgent matters related to my inheritance." When I hung up the phone, I looked at Eleanor's photograph on the nightstand and smiled. "You always knew, didn't you, my dear? You always knew this day would come." For the first time in months, I slept deeply, not with the resignation of one who had been defeated, but with the tranquility of one who finally found their strength. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was exactly as Eleanor described her in her notes. A middle-aged woman with perceptive eyes that didn't let any detail escape. When I entered her office 3 days later, she had already analyzed copies of the documents I sent by email and assembled a preliminary strategy. "Mr. Thompson," she said after offering me coffee, "your wife was extremely meticulous. All documents are in order, investments were made legally, and the will is absolutely uncontestable. You are without doubt a very wealthy man." Those words sounded strange to me, who had always lived counting pennies to make ends meet. But the attorney continued, showing me a detailed report of all my assets. "Most interesting," she observed, "is that your wife structured everything so your son and daughter-in-law cannot contest it. The behavior clause in the will is particularly ingenious. They would only be entitled to a portion of the assets if they cared for you with love and respect. Considering what you told me about their attempts to remove you from your own house, we can easily argue that clause was violated." "What should I do now?" I asked, still trying to absorb the magnitude of the situation. Sarah leaned forward with a determined gleam in her eyes. "First, don't sign absolutely anything they put in front of you. Second, I need you to maintain the appearance that you haven't discovered anything yet. The more they expose themselves, the better for our case. As for the house, let them think they've won for now. Pretend you're considering the move to the facility. Ask to visit the place, question the costs. The more they reveal themselves, the more ammunition we'll have." In the following weeks, I followed Sarah's guidance to the letter. I allowed Michael and Patricia to continue with their plans, feigning resignation while secretly documenting every conversation, every veiled threat, every attempt to belittle me or make me appear incompetent. Patricia even brought a doctor friend to evaluate my mental condition, a man who barely examined me before suggesting I might be developing dementia. I recorded the entire fraudulent consultation on my cell phone following Sarah's instructions. Michael, for his part, intensified his efforts to empty the house. Boxes and more boxes of my memories were packed, labeled, and sent for donation or simply discarded. It hurt to see my memories being treated with such contempt, but I stayed firm, knowing that each act of theirs only strengthened my case. One afternoon, while Michael cataloged my belongings in the living room, I let slip some information as if casually. "You know, Michael, I was thinking of giving you my gold watch before going to the facility. It was your grandfather's after all." He stopped what he was doing, visibly interested. "The gold watch, the one you kept in the wooden box?" "Yes, but I can't find it. Did you see it anywhere?" Michael blushed slightly. "No, I don't know what you're talking about." "Strange," I continued innocently. "I also can't find the cufflinks Eleanor gave me for our 40th anniversary. I hope they weren't lost in the move." I saw the discomfort in his eyes, the momentary guilt that was soon replaced by a poorly crafted excuse about having stored my jewelry in a safe place. Later I reported that conversation to Sarah, who smiled satisfied. "Perfect. We're building a solid case of financial abuse." The decisive moment came when, following Sarah's advice, I asked to visit the facility before making my final decision. Michael and Patricia took me on a Sunday, showing me a place that looked more like a warehouse for the elderly than the paradise they had promised. Tiny rooms, overworked staff, and a smell of disinfectant that barely disguised the odor of urine in the air. "Isn't it wonderful, Dad?" Michael asked with forced enthusiasm. "Look, it even has a community TV room." I looked at the depressing room where half a dozen elderly people stared fixedly at an old television and felt my stomach turn. "How much does this place cost?" I asked. Patricia answered promptly. "Don't worry about that. We'll sell your house and the money will be more than enough to cover costs for many years. And if I live longer than the money lasts?" The silence that followed was answer enough. They hadn't thought about that, or worse, they had thought about it and didn't care. On the way home, I remained silent while they animatedly discussed their plans to renovate the house as soon as I left. They talked about tearing down walls, modernizing the kitchen, transforming my room into a home office for Patricia. "And Mom's room?" I asked suddenly. Michael hesitated. "Well, we were thinking of transforming it into a guest room or maybe a larger closet." "I understand," I replied, looking out the car window to hide the pain in my eyes. That night I called Sarah and told her, "I'm ready. Let's proceed with the plan." 2 days later, Michael and Patricia appeared with the final papers for the house transfer and my admission to the facility. A man in a suit accompanied them. Their lawyer, who I later discovered was just a friend of Patricia's who worked as a real estate consultant. "Dad, we brought the documents for you to sign," Michael announced, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "As soon as you sign here and here, we can finalize your move to the facility. We've already reserved a spot for next week." I looked at the papers calmly, pretending to study them while I heard the doorbell ring. "Who could that be?" Patricia asked, irritated by the interruption. "It must be my friend George," I replied innocently. I asked him to come help me with some things. When Patricia opened the door, it wasn't George who entered, but Sarah Mitchell, accompanied by a court officer and a social worker. "Good afternoon," she said with a professional smile. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, attorney for Mr. Harrison Thompson. We've come for an official visit related to a complaint of attempted fraud and abuse against an elderly person." Michael's face lost all color, while Patricia tried to maintain composure. "There must be some mistake," she said, extending her hand which Sarah ignored completely. "We're just helping my father-in-law move to a place more suitable for his age." "Interesting," Sarah replied, pointing to the papers on the table. "Then I can assume these documents were reviewed by an independent attorney representing Mr. Harrison's interests?" The silence was deafening. "I'd also like to inform you," Sarah continued, "that we have reason to believe jewelry and valuables belonging to Mr. Thompson were removed from this residence without his authorization. The court officer has a warrant to verify these items." It was then I saw something I'll never forget. The exact moment my son realized his plan was crumbling. His eyes widened with panic, then narrowed with rage and finally filled with tears when understanding hit him. "Dad," he whispered, "what did you do?" I stood up slowly, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "What did I do, Michael? I defended myself, just like your mother knew I would one day need to do." The court officer and social worker began documenting the house's condition, photographing the stacked boxes, partially emptied rooms, unsigned transfer papers on the table. Sarah remained by my side, a calm and authoritative presence that emanated confidence. "Mr. Thompson," the social worker said, "do you feel coerced to leave your residence against your will?" "Yes," I replied firmly. "My son and daughter-in-law have pressured me for months, even threatening to declare me mentally incompetent if I didn't agree to go to a nursing home." Michael stepped forward indignantly. "This is absurd. We're just trying to take care of him. He's confused. He's forgotten things. Left the stove on." "Interesting," Sarah interrupted, pulling a small device from her pocket. "I have recordings from the last 2 months that contradict that claim, including a conversation where Mrs. Patricia admits to having invented the stove incident to convince Mr. Michael that his father could no longer live alone." Patricia paled. "That's illegal. You can't record people without consent." "Actually," Sarah smiled, "Mr. Thompson recorded conversations in his own home, where he has every right to protect his interests. Additionally, we have recent medical reports attesting to his full mental capacity, performed by independent professionals, not by doctor friends brought by the missus." The social worker made notes on her clipboard while the court officer continued his methodical work. Michael collapsed into a chair, crying openly. "Why are you doing this to us, Dad? We're your family." "Family," I repeated, feeling a mixture of sadness and indignation. It was as family that you packed my memories like they were trash. It was as family that you took your grandfather's watch without permission. It was as family that you and Patricia planned to abandon me in a fifth-rate nursing home to keep my house. "It's not like that," he sobbed. "Patricia convinced me it was best for you. She said you were losing your memory, that it was dangerous for you to live alone." "And you believed her instead of trusting your own father?" I asked, feeling my heart break again. "Do you know me so little?" Patricia, realizing the situation was out of control, tried to regain authority. "This is a misunderstanding we can resolve as a family. We don't need lawyers or court officers. Mr. Thompson, we always wanted what was best for you." "The best," Sarah intervened. "Like the attempts to transfer the house property to Mr. Michael's name, even before Mr. Thompson's move to the facility, or the unauthorized withdrawals from Mr. Thompson's bank account in recent months." Michael's eyes widened. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. I swear I didn't take your money." "No, you didn't take it," I replied calmly. "But Patricia did. I have bank statements showing transfers made with my card to a joint account of yours on dates when I wasn't even home." Patricia adjusted her suit jacket, visibly uncomfortable. "There must be some error." "There's no error," I continued, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "Just like it's no error that you thought I was a poor and defenseless old man, easy to manipulate and discard. But there's something you don't know." I walked slowly to my bag and pulled out a folder of documents Sarah had prepared for me. "Your mother, Michael, wasn't just the quiet accountant you knew. She silently built a financial empire over the years and left it all to me." I placed on the table property deeds, stock certificates, bank statements with values that made Patricia's eyes widen with incredulity and greed. "This building on Fifth Avenue," I pointed to one of the deeds. "It's mine, as well as the land on the coast you visited last summer, believing it belonged to your boss, Patricia." Michael took the papers with trembling hands. "This can't be true." "It's true," Sarah confirmed. "And there's more. The apartment where you live also belongs to Mr. Thompson. You pay rent to a management company that deposits the amount directly into an account in his name." Patricia staggered as if she'd received a punch. "This is impossible." "And those company shares where you work, Patricia, the ones bought by an anonymous investor 5 years ago that guaranteed your promotion, those are also mine." The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Michael looked at me as if seeing a ghost. "Why did Mom never tell us?" he finally asked, his voice almost inaudible. "Because she didn't trust Patricia's intentions, and apparently she was right to be cautious." Patricia attempted one last, desperate maneuver. "Mr. Thompson, we can resolve this. Obviously there was a misunderstanding. We didn't know about these resources. If you have such means, we can find a better place. More luxurious." "I'm not interested in any better place," I replied firmly. "This is my home, and here I'm going to stay." "And what about our apartment?" Michael asked with tears running down his face. "Are you going to evict us?" "That depends," I replied, feeling a mixture of pain and determination, "on how much you're willing to learn about respect, dignity, and true love." Sarah then took the floor. "Meanwhile, I have here a temporary injunction preventing either of you from removing more items from this house or attempting to transfer its property. We're also requesting the immediate return of all goods already removed, especially family jewelry and personal documents." Michael broke down sobbing while Patricia remained paralyzed, as if trying to process all the information she'd just received. The court officer continued his work, methodically photographing each room, each document, each piece of evidence of what had happened in that house. "I suggest," Sarah said with a firm voice, "that you two leave now and think very carefully about your next steps. We're prepared to take this case forward with all its legal consequences, unless we reach an agreement that fully respects Mr. Thompson's rights and wishes." Patricia finally recovered her voice, but she was no longer the arrogant woman I knew. There was fear in her eyes. "How much? How much is all this worth?" she asked, gesturing toward the documents. Sarah smiled coldly. "Much more than you could ever pay in a lifetime of work, Mrs. Patricia. Now I suggest you withdraw." When the door closed behind them, I felt my legs weaken. Sarah helped me to the sofa where I collapsed, emotionally exhausted. "You were very brave," she said, sitting beside me. "Not everyone would have the strength to confront their own family like that." "I don't know if it was courage or desperation," I confessed, watching the social worker still taking notes. "I never wanted to reach this point. Unfortunately, often those we love most are the ones who hurt us most," Sarah replied. "But now you're in control. What do you want to do next?" I looked around the room, at the walls that witnessed so many moments of my life, at the empty spaces where photographs and memories once hung. "I want to get my things back," I replied firmly. "And then I want Michael to understand exactly what he did. Not for revenge, but because he needs to learn." In the days that followed, I received desperate calls from Michael. At first I ignored them all, following Sarah's advice to maintain distance until legal matters were resolved. Patricia, on the other hand, disappeared completely. I learned she had taken leave from work and traveled to resolve personal matters. A week after the confrontation, Sarah brought me news. "We received a settlement proposal," she said, handing me a folder. "Your daughter-in-law is willing to return all your possessions, publicly acknowledge that you're in full command of your mental faculties, and renounce any claim on your house or estate." "And what does she want in return?" I asked, knowing Patricia's character too well to believe in sincere repentance. "That you don't use your influence as a shareholder to harm her at the company, and that you don't evict her from the apartment immediately. She's asking for 6 months to find another place." I considered the proposal for a moment. "And Michael, what does he say about this?" Sarah hesitated. "Your son didn't participate in this negotiation. From what I understand, there are tensions in the marriage after the revelation." That didn't surprise me. Patricia had always been the type of person who abandons ship when it starts sinking. Now that she knew she wouldn't get my fortune, she was probably already blaming Michael for the plan's failure. "Tell Patricia I accept her conditions with one caveat," I replied after thinking for a moment. "If she wants to stay in the apartment for 6 months, she'll have to increase the rent by 50%. After all, now she knows who the real owner is." Sarah smiled. "It will be my pleasure to convey your message." 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected visit. Michael was at my door, alone, with deep, dark circles and a face marked by sleepless nights. "Can I come in?" he asked timidly, so different from the arrogant man who had tried to kick me out of my own house. I opened the door silently and let him pass. He carried 2 large boxes that he carefully placed on the living room table. "Your jewelry," he said with an emotional voice. "All of it. And also your photo albums, Mom's letters, everything I took." I opened the first box, and there were the treasures of my life intact. My father's gold watch, the cufflinks Eleanor had given me, the wedding ring with the small sapphire she saved for a year to buy. "Patricia and I separated," Michael said abruptly, breaking the silence. She blamed me for everything, said I should have noticed that Mom would never live so modestly if she didn't have something hidden. I didn't respond, just continued checking the box contents, making sure everything was there. "Dad," he continued, his voice trembling, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. What we did, what I allowed to be done, is unforgivable. But I need you to know I really believed I was doing the right thing." I finally raised my eyes to him. The right thing was to take me out of my house, throw away my memories like trash, treat me like a senile child. "No," he admitted, tears flowing freely. "Patricia convinced me you were getting worse, that it was dangerous for you to live alone. She invented stories about you forgetting things, leaving the stove on, and I believed her instead of trusting my own father." "Why, Michael?" I asked, feeling the weight of decades of apparently wasted love. "After everything I did for you, after all the sacrifices, how could you believe I deserved to be treated that way?" He sat on the sofa, seeming smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. "Because it was easier," he finally confessed. "It was easier to believe you needed help than admit I'd married a woman who only cared about money and status. It was easier to pretend we were taking care of you than face the truth about what we'd become." His face contorted with genuine shame. "When Patricia first suggested we sell the house, I said no. Then she started planting doubts in my head, small seeds of concern about your mental health, your ability to live alone. And I let those seeds grow because deep down, I wanted the house. I wanted to transform it, modernize it, erase the marks of the past that made me feel guilty for not being the son I should have been." His words hit me like a revelation. It wasn't just greed, it was guilt. It was the desire to erase the evidence of everything I had done for him, everything he couldn't reciprocate. "And now?" I asked. "What do you want from me, Michael?" He wiped his tears with the back of his hand like he did when he was a child. "Nothing. I don't deserve anything from you. I just came to return what's yours and to say that even if you never forgive me, I know what I did and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person." I looked at my son, because despite everything, he was still my son. And I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Honesty. Not the calculated manipulation Patricia had perfected, nor the false concern he'd exhibited in recent months, but genuine vulnerability. "Where are you living?" I asked. "With a friend for now. I'm looking for a small apartment I can afford with my salary." I nodded, absorbing the information. "And the apartment?" "Patricia is there," he replied. "She kept almost everything in the separation agreement, said it was the least I could do after ruining our plans." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Patricia continued being Patricia until the end. "Michael," I said finally, "I can't promise things will go back to how they were before. You broke something deep between us, and it's going to take time, if it ever happens, to rebuild that trust." He nodded, accepting my words without protest. "But," I continued, "your mother believed that deep down you were still the boy she raised. She believed you could find your way back to the person you should be." "Mom always was better at seeing the good in people than I was," he murmured. "Yes," I agreed, "and maybe I need to learn to have a little more of that faith." I didn't forgive him that day. I didn't invite him back home, nor promise to forget what had happened. But when he got up to leave, I didn't stop him from hugging me briefly, a timid and insecure contact that contained both regret and hope. After he left, I was alone with my recovered jewelry and the pain of a betrayal that was still very fresh. But for the first time in months, I also felt something different. Not just the satisfaction of having defended myself, but the possibility, however remote, of healing. 2 weeks after Michael's visit, I received an unexpected call from Sarah. "Mr. Thompson, a situation arose that you should know about. Patricia didn't pay the increased rent according to our agreement, and from what I learned, she's planning to leave the country." "Leave the country for where?" "Apparently, she has a cousin in Canada. My sources at her company indicate she resigned and is already selling her belongings." That didn't surprise me. Patricia had always been the type who runs when things get tough. What surprised me was what Sarah said next. "There's something else. Michael contacted me yesterday asking for legal help. He discovered Patricia emptied their joint accounts before the separation and left him with various debts in his name." I felt a pang in my chest. Despite everything, it was my son who was suffering. What does he intend to do? "We're filing injunctions to prevent her from leaving the country without resolving her debts. But frankly, I think she already transferred the money abroad. Michael is practically bankrupt, besides being in debt." After hanging up, I stood looking out the window for a long time, observing the garden where Michael used to play when he was a child. I remembered Eleanor's letter, her words about using power not to hurt, but to protect and teach. The next day, I asked Sarah to prepare some documents and called Michael. "We need to talk," I said simply. He arrived punctually, dressed in simple clothes I'd never seen him wear. The glamour of an executive's husband had disappeared completely. "Sarah told me about Patricia," I began as soon as we sat down. "About the debts, the money, everything." Michael nodded resignedly. "She planned all of this months ago. While we pretended to worry about you, she was already preparing her escape. I was so stupid, Dad, so blind." "Many intelligent people are deceived by people like Patricia," I replied. "Don't blame yourself for that. Blame yourself for what you did to me, not for what she did to you." He lowered his eyes, accepting the harsh truth in my words. "I have a proposal for you," I continued, sliding a folder across the table. "It's not charity or automatic forgiveness. It's an opportunity." Michael opened the folder hesitantly, and his eyes widened, reading the contents. "This is a work contract." "Yes, for the Eleanor Thompson Foundation, an organization I'm creating to help elderly victims of family abuse and abandonment." The idea had been born during my sleepless nights when I realized my story wasn't unique. How many other elderly people were being manipulated by greedy relatives? How many were being forced to leave their homes, to give up their lives, without having the luck I had of having a cautious wife? "You want me to work for you?" Michael asked, confused. "I want you to work for the foundation. Your knowledge in project management will be useful. The salary is modest but fair, and there's a housing clause. You can occupy the small apartment above the garage of this house, which will save you on rent while you reorganize your life." "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this for me after everything?" I stood up and walked to the window, observing my garden blooming under the afternoon sun. "I'm not doing this for you, Michael. I'm doing it for the man you can become, for the son your mother believed you still were deep down. And I'm doing it for all the elderly who didn't have the luck I had, who have no way to defend themselves." I turned around to face him. "Your work will be arduous and frequently painful. You're going to hear stories that will remind you of what you yourself tried to do to me. You'll have to look into the eyes of people who were betrayed by those who should have loved them. And maybe through that work, you'll truly understand what you tried to do." Michael held the contract with trembling hands. "I don't know if I deserve this opportunity." "You probably don't deserve it," I replied honestly. "But your mother always said that forgiveness isn't something that's deserved. It's something that's offered. I'm not ready to forgive you completely, but I'm willing to offer a path." In the months that followed, I transformed my pain into purpose. With Sarah's help, I created the Eleanor Thompson Foundation. Using part of the fortune my wife had accumulated to defend those who couldn't defend themselves alone. We bought a large house near mine and transformed it into a legal and emotional support center for elderly in vulnerable situations. Michael, true to his word, worked tirelessly. At first, the foundation's other employees treated him with suspicion. Everyone knew our story. which I never tried to hide, but over time his genuine dedication began to earn respect. The path to redemption wasn't easy for him. There were days when he came home, since the small apartment above my garage had become his home, with red eyes from crying after hearing particularly painful stories of abandoned or exploited elderly. "How can you look at me every day knowing what I tried to do?" he asked me one night when we met in the shared kitchen. "Because I see that you're trying to change," I replied simply, "and because your mother believed you could be better." Patricia never returned. We learned through Foundation contacts that she had established herself in Canada and was already involved with another man, a wealthy widower by coincidence or pattern. Part of me wondered if I should alert him, but another part knew that some predators are only stopped when they find prey that bites back. A year after creating the Foundation, I received an honor I never expected, a Human Rights Award for our work with vulnerable elderly. The day of the ceremony, as I prepared to give my speech, I looked at the audience and saw Michael in the front row, applauding with tears in his eyes. That night after the ceremony, as we walked through my house's garden, our garden as I was starting to think of it, Michael handed me a small package. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it," he replied nervously. Inside was a handmade artisanal book. On the pages, Michael had pasted old family photographs, many of the same photos he had packed so carelessly a year before, but now each came accompanied by a handwritten letter, remembering the captured moment and reflecting on the meaning of those memories. "I spent months searching for these photos," he explained. "Some were with Patricia, others with friends I had given them to without thinking. I wanted to reunite our memories again, not to erase them, but to honor them." I leafed through the book carefully, feeling the weight of decades of family history in my hands. On the last page was a recent photo of the Foundation with the entire team gathered in front of the building, and below a simple inscription, "For my dad, who taught me it's never too late to start over, and for my mom, who always knew I would find my way back." That night, for the first time in over a year, I hugged my son without reservations. It wasn't complete forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely. But it was a beginning, a recognition that we were both changing, growing, learning to be a family again, this time based on mutual respect instead of obligation. As we watched the stars from our shared garden, I thought about Eleanor and how she had planned all of this. Not just the financial protection, but also the possibility of redemption. She knew our son better than either of us. She knew he could get lost, but she also believed he could find his way back to the light. And as the stars shone above us, I felt she was right about everything. 18 months after creating the Foundation, I received news that would change everything again. One of the volunteer lawyers working with us approached me with a grave expression. "Mr. Thompson, we found something you should see," he said, handing me a folder. "During our investigation for Mrs. Olivia's case, we discovered the same scheme was used against several other elderly women. And guess who's behind it all?" I opened the folder and felt my blood freeze. There was Patricia using another name, but unmistakable in surveillance photographs. She had returned to the United States secretly and was operating a sophisticated scheme to deceive elderly widows, making them sign documents that transferred their properties to shell companies. "She came back," I murmured, "and she's doing the same to other women." The lawyer nodded grimly. "We've already informed the authorities, but we need someone who knows her to make a formal identification, someone who can testify about her methods and personality." That night I discussed the discovery with Michael. He paled seeing the photographs and documents. "She hasn't changed anything," he said bitterly. "She just found new victims." "The authorities want us to testify against her," I explained. "I've already decided I'm going, but you don't need to get involved if you don't want to." Michael looked at me with a determination that reminded me of myself. "No, Dad, I need to do this. I need to face her, not just for us, but for all those women." In the following weeks, we worked with police and the district attorney, providing detailed testimonies about Patricia's methods, the subtle manipulations, the small lies that gradually escalated to complete fraud. Michael, in particular, was crucial in explaining how she had convinced him to participate in the plan against me, how she planted doubts and insecurities, how she gradually isolated her victims. When the trial day finally arrived, I felt an anxiety I hadn't experienced since the confrontation in my house. The courtroom was packed. Our case had received media attention, partly due to the Foundation's work, which was now nationally known for its fight against financial abuse of the elderly. When I entered the courtroom with Michael by my side, I felt all eyes turned toward us. Patricia's most recent victims were seated together, women aged between 65 and 85, all with stories painfully similar to mine. Patricia was brought in handcuffed, wearing a worn suit that contrasted with the elegance she had always exhibited. When her eyes met mine, I saw a flash of rage, quickly replaced by that mask of calculated charm she used so well. The decisive moment came when the judge entered the courtroom. My heart almost stopped when I recognized him. Judge Robert Martinez, announced the court officer. He was the young lawyer who had worked as an intern at the courthouse decades ago, when I was a clerk there. The same shy man I had encouraged when everyone else treated him with disdain. The boy for whom I brought coffee on nights when he worked late studying for exams. He didn't recognize me immediately, busy with initial proceedings. But when my turn came to testify and I said my name, I saw his eyes lift from the papers with an expression of surprise and recognition. "Mr. Thompson?" he asked, adjusting his glasses as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. "Harrison Thompson from the Regional Court Clerk's office?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied with a small smile. "It's been a long time." The judge smiled briefly before resuming his professional expression. "It certainly has been. Please continue with your testimony." For the next 2 hours, I narrated in detail everything Patricia had done, how she had manipulated my son, how she had tried to strip me of my house and dignity, how she had planned to abandon me in a dubious quality nursing home. I spoke about discovering the fortune my wife had left and how that had frustrated her plans. And now, I concluded, she's doing the same to other women who didn't have the luck I had of having a cautious wife. When I finished, Patricia's lawyer stood up for cross-examination, trying to paint me as a confused old man who had imagined persecution where there was only family concern. "Mr. Thompson," she asked with false sympathy, "isn't it true that you were having memory lapses at the time? That you sometimes forgot where you put things? Left the stove on?" "No," I replied firmly. "I never had such problems. Your client invented those stories to convince my son I needed to be institutionalized. And how can you be so certain of that if you had memory problems?" she insisted with a condescending smile. "Objection, Your Honor," the prosecutor intervened. "Argumentative." "Sustained," Judge Robert replied. "Counselor, rephrase your question." But before she could do so, I asked permission to respond. The lady asks how I can be certain. I can be certain because I have complete medical reports performed after my daughter-in-law's attempt to declare me incompetent. I can be certain because I have recordings of her admitting she invented those incidents. And I can be certain because at 72 years old, I can still remember the first day Judge Robert Martinez entered the courthouse as an intern, wearing a navy blue suit that was too big in the shoulders, carrying a synthetic leather briefcase he had received from his mother as a graduation gift. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Robert looked at me with a mixture of surprise and emotion. I remember every detail of that day, just as I remember every detail of the day my daughter-in-law and son tried to convince me I was no longer capable of taking care of myself. My memory, counselor, is perfectly intact. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the judge's pen scratching something in his notebook. Michael testified next with a courage that filled me with pride. He spoke openly about how he had been manipulated, about his own guilt and regret, about the path of redemption he had found through work at the Foundation. "Patricia convinced me my dad was losing mental capacity," he explained with an emotional voice. "She started with small suggestions. Did you notice how your dad forgot that actor's name? Did you see how he confused the dates? Until I began seeing problems where none existed." When Patricia finally testified, it was like watching an actor on stage. She denied all accusations. She painted herself as a concerned daughter-in-law who only wanted what was best for her father-in-law. She even shed false tears talking about how hurt she was by the accusations. But then the prosecutor presented the evidence: recordings, falsified documents, testimonies from all the other victims whose stories were almost identical to mine. And finally, bank records showing how she had diverted money from all of them. At the end of the trial that lasted 3 days, Judge Robert Martinez pronounced his sentence. Patricia Caldwell Costa, this court finds you guilty of all charges of fraud, ideological falsehood, coercion, and abuse against vulnerable elderly. You exploited the trust of relatives and women who in their golden years deserved protection and respect, not manipulation and theft. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking directly at Patricia. Particularly disturbing to this court is the coldness with which you planned and executed your crimes, specifically targeting people you considered weak and unable to defend themselves. He paused, then continued with a voice that combined authority and contained emotion. For these crimes, I sentence you to 12 years imprisonment in a closed regime, in addition to full restitution to the victims and a fine proportional to the damage caused. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom, Judge Robert looked at me and made a small gesture of recognition that few noticed, but which meant everything to me. A reminder that small kindnesses, like encouraging an insecure young intern decades ago, can return when least expected. Leaving the courthouse, we were surrounded by reporters and by other elderly people who had attended the trial seeking inspiration and hope. A lady of about 80 approached me with tears in her eyes. "You gave me courage," she said, taking my hands. "After seeing you in the newspaper talking about the foundation, I realized my nephew was doing the same to me. Thanks to you, I managed to stop before it was too late." That night at home, Michael and I sat in the garden with a bottle of wine, celebrating not just the victory in court, but also the journey we had traveled together. "You know what's most ironic?" he said, looking at the stars. "If Patricia had never tried to take your house, the foundation would never have existed. All those women we're helping now wouldn't have anywhere to go. Your mother always said that even in the worst situations we can find purpose," I replied. I think in the end she was right about that too. Michael smiled, a smile that finally reached his eyes, reminding me of the boy he had been before Patricia entered our lives. "She would be proud of you, Dad, of everything you built from pain. Of both of us," I corrected gently. "She always knew you would find your way back." We looked at the starry sky in silence for a few minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. The foundation had become more than just work for us. It was a shared mission, a purpose that reconnected us in a way I never imagined possible after everything we had been through. "What happened today in court?" Michael said finally, "when the judge recognized you. It was like seeing destiny unfold, as if all the pieces finally fit together." "Life is like that," I replied. "Sometimes the kindnesses we offer return when we need them most." I never imagined that shy young intern would one day become the judge who would sentence Patricia. "You were always like that, weren't you? Always helping others without expecting anything in return." I smiled, remembering all the small gestures throughout my life that I never considered extraordinary. Bringing coffee to interns who worked late, defending younger employees from tyrannical bosses, offering a friendly shoulder to colleagues in difficulty. "It's just the way I was raised," I replied. "Your grandmother always said that kindness is the only investment that never fails." Michael raised his glass. "To justice and to kindness that always returns." 5 years passed since Patricia's trial. The Eleanor Thompson Foundation became a national reference in defending elderly rights. What began as a small legal support office expanded to 3 units in different cities, offering not only legal assistance, but also psychological support, social activities, and most recently temporary housing for elderly in vulnerable situations. On a sunny spring morning, I was sitting in the foundation's garden watching a group of ladies participating in a Tai Chi class when Michael approached with an envelope in his hands. "It arrived today," he said, handing me the envelope with the Justice Department seal. "I think it's what we've been waiting for. with hands slightly trembling from age. Now at 77, I already felt the weight of years in my joints. I opened the envelope and read its contents. It was approved, I announced, feeling a knot in my throat. The Thompson bill for patrimonial and psychological protection of vulnerable elderly was signed yesterday. Michael sat beside me, his eyes shining with contained tears. We did it, Dad. We really did it. The bill, the result of 3 years of tireless work alongside legislators and elderly rights defense organizations, created more robust legal mechanisms to protect people over 65 from financial and psychological abuse, especially those perpetrated by family members. It was the culmination of everything we had learned from our own painful experience, transformed into an instrument that could prevent thousands of other elderly from suffering the same ordeal. Your mother would be so proud, I murmured, carefully putting the letter back in the envelope. Not just of us, but of how her foresight allowed us to create something so much bigger than ourselves. Michael took my wrinkled hand in his. At 55, he had become a strong and compassionate man, completely different from that manipulated and insecure person who almost kicked me out of my own house. His work at the foundation had transformed him, just as it had transformed me. I have something to show you, he said, helping me stand. A surprise we're preparing for the foundation's anniversary celebration. We walked together to the new wing of the main building, which had been kept closed in recent weeks during renovations. Michael opened the door and led me inside. The walls, previously empty, were now covered with photographs, dozens of them carefully framed. They were faces of elderly people we had helped over the years, each with a small plaque telling their story briefly. This is the Hall of Stories, Michael explained. We want everyone who visits the foundation to see the faces and know the stories of the people we help, so they understand that each elderly person is not just a case, but an entire life of experiences, memories, and dignity. In the center of the main wall was an empty space waiting for a larger picture. And here, he continued, will go your photograph, Dad, with the story that started it all. I felt my eyes fill with tears. I don't know if I deserve such a prominent place. After all, I was lucky. Many others don't have the protection Eleanor left me. That's exactly why your story needs to be told, Michael insisted. To show that resistance is possible, that it's never too late to defend yourself, and that even the worst betrayals can eventually lead to something good. We walked slowly through the corridor, stopping to read some of the stories. Mrs. Olivia, 82, who recovered her house after her nephew tried to sell it without her consent. Mr. Albert, 77, who escaped an abusive marriage after decades of psychological manipulation. Mrs. Carmen, 90, who reported her children for embezzlement and now gave lectures on financial independence in old age. All these people, Michael said, found their voice and strength because you found yours first. That night, after a tiring but gratifying day, I returned to my house, the same house I almost lost 5 years before. Michael now lived in his own small house near the foundation, but we still had dinner together regularly, and on Sundays he came for breakfast with me, resuming a tradition we had lost during the difficult years. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the garden Eleanor had loved so much and which was now more beautiful than ever. The roses bloomed abundantly, cared for by my hands, which, although slower with age, still knew exactly how much water and sun each plant needed. I thought about how my life had changed completely in these last years. From the near tragedy of losing my house and dignity emerged a purpose I never imagined having. From my only son's betrayal was born a reconciliation deeper and truer than our previous relationship had ever been. On the table next to my chair was the old jewelry box Michael had tried to take, now returned and restored. I opened it and took out my father's gold watch, running my fingers over its smooth, shining surface. Tomorrow I would wear it at the Foundation's anniversary commemoration ceremony, where the Thompson bill would be officially announced. A small envelope at the bottom of the box caught my attention. I opened it and found a handwritten note from Michael. Dad, I can never completely erase the pain I caused, but I hope to continue being worthy of the second chance you gave me. Every day at the Foundation reminds me that our work isn't just about laws and rights, but about restoring the dignity that many try to take from our elderly. Thank you for teaching me it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to do what's right. With all my love and gratitude, Michael. I put the note back in the box, feeling a peace that only comes when we finally understand that even the most painful experiences can lead us to places we never imagined reaching. The next morning, as I prepared for the ceremony, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw the white hair I now wore with pride, the wrinkles that marked a face that had known both suffering and joy, the eyes that had cried so many tears but now shone with purpose and satisfaction. And I thought about what I would say in my speech, about the words I would like other men my age to hear and take with them. It's never too late to defend yourself. It's never too late to transform pain into purpose. And it's never, ever too late to discover your own strength, even when those who should protect you are the same ones trying to tear you down. When I arrived at the foundation that morning, I was greeted by a crowd of smiling faces. The team we had built, the elderly we had helped, authorities and supporters who believed in our cause. And in the center of it all, Michael, now executive director of the foundation, was waiting for me with a warm and sincere embrace. As I climbed onto the stage to give my speech, I looked at all those people and felt deep gratitude for everything. Yes, for everything, even for Patricia and Michael's attempts to take everything from me, because without that darkness, I would never have discovered the light that now illuminated so many other lives. My name is Harrison, I began, adjusting the microphone. I am 77 years old, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything, only to find a purpose greater than I ever imagined. And as I shared my journey, I saw in the audience's eyes recognition, hope, and most importantly, the determination that my story would not be unique, that together we were creating a world where the elderly would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. At the end of the speech, when applause resonated through the hall, I looked at the sky through the tall windows and smiled. Did you see, Eleanor? I thought. You were right about everything. Now, if you liked this story, click on this next video that's appearing on the screen, because in it you'll find a story of betrayal and twists like you've never seen before.